Thanks for tuning in with us for another installment of the Fermented Friday virtual tastings. This week I'm joined by Jim Wagner and Beth Vita of BC Brewery, located in Hunt Valley, Maryland. If you haven't been out to their brewery yet, it's an excellent place to go and visit. Great food, great beer, and we're going to talk about how you can support them during this really strange time with regard to the response to the world around us right now. My name is Jim Bachman. I'm with the Brewers Association of Maryland, and I'm going to be handing over the great conversation that we're going to have this afternoon to these two in just a moment. But before we get started, I just want to let you know, Maryland breweries are still operating. They are still open for business. Check with your favorite local brewery about how you can get their beer. And please note that these small businesses really are counting on your support in this troubling time. If you have the ability to support them either locally in their tap rooms, or as some of our conversation on Facebook has gone today, in comments through retailers, please do. Ask for Maryland beer wherever you're buying beer. Try to support these great businesses when you have that chance, and take care of your neighbors and your community. They're here for you and they need your help. So I'll jump in periodically to moderate a little bit, ask some questions of our guests. If you have any questions that you would like to have asked or answered, please put them in the comments and I'll be happy to address those. So without too much further ado, Jim, Beth, great to have you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hey, Jim, appreciate it, man. Good to see you.
Great seeing you again, Jim. We bump into each other quite a bit at festivals and stuff. And I was just thinking before this, I think it's been 9 years or so since the first time I met you. And I've always truly appreciated every time I see you having a nice, great greeting. And I feel like we're fast friends.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. We've always got along, and it's always good to see you as well.
Great. Well, Beth, it's nice to meet you for the second time. And I look forward to hearing what you guys have going on. So do you mind telling us a little bit about BC Brewery, what you're doing, where you're located, kind of the history of the brewery, and roll on from there?
Absolutely, yeah. This is a little bittersweet, but we were supposed to have our 2-year anniversary party this Sunday. We had plans for a big Oyster Fest blowout, and unfortunately with COVID, that drastically changed our plans, as it has done with everybody. So, so we've been here for almost 2 years now, and things have been going good. A lot of expansion. The community has really embraced us, which we really appreciate. I think the community here really appreciates the diversity of beer that we offer here. 24 taps, and that includes beers anywhere from light lagers up to barley wines. And somewhat recently, we started making some seltzers for those people that enjoy them. We even got wine hybrids going, which have been a really huge hit lately.
The wine hybrid thing is interesting. I showcased one of your SEAL Team beers at the Great American Beer Festival back in October of 2019. And we also had a Pools Island beer wine hybrid there. And the number of people that were kind of like from the mountain region of the country that were coming up talking about their experience with that style and approach to beer was so surprising to me. It was something new to me that I hadn't seen before. And these people were coming up saying, oh, you should try the ones from this brewery and this brewery. So it sounds like it's a style that's getting a lot of traction kind of in the middle of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're enjoyable. It's great. If you're a red wine fan, white wine fan, we've done a Merlot, we've done a Cab. The Merlot's on right now, and then in the tanks we have our first white. We have Pinot Grigio, and what we decided to do early on was we decided to keep these hybrids gluten-free. As you know, the wine's already gluten-free, and we're already doing gluten-free beer here. So the product, in addition to being a hybrid, also is 100% gluten-free.
That's awesome. And I'm excited to hear you talk about the hybrid when you get to showing it today, because I know that's on your list.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'm also, like I told you before we started, I'm excited to talk about the gluten-free beer, because I think that a lot of people have some misunderstandings about gluten-free, gluten-reduced, and having a brewery on that's specializing in producing styles like that for their guests is going to be very helpful to the consumer, I think.
Yep, Jim, you hit it right on the head. There is a big difference for those of us that don't have celiac or some type of gluten allergen. It's not that big of a deal, but for those that do, like Beth, gluten reduced is not good enough. You need it to be 100% gluten-free, and that's a path we chose to take here. We've actually dedicated our small brew house completely to gluten-free beer as we would need to. So, it's completely separate. We're not technically a gluten-free facility, but everything and anything that touches that beer from beginning to end is free of gluten. And we also do bench tests here to verify that and make sure that's the case.
That's awesome. That seems like it's an expensive commitment to make, but it sounds like the right way to do it.
It is. It's expensive. We try to keep the price, the best we can, not, but as you just mentioned, the ingredients, the majority of our ingredients are coming from California. And these are from very small mom and pop maltsters, and they, their facilities are completely dedicated to gluten-free grains like millet, rice, sorghum. So, it does cost a little bit more to produce something like this, but what's been great and what's really fascinated me is the relatively small but very vocal crowd that we get in for gluten-free beers. They are absolutely dedicated, appreciative that they can actually try and drink beer. And we're humbled by them telling us that it's some of the best gluten-free beer they've ever had.
That's awesome. And I have not tried much gluten-free beer, but I can attest to the stout that you had being phenomenal. I was blown away by it. And
appreciate it.
I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined that was a gluten-free beer, just from a sensory perspective. It had all the mouthfeel it needed, excellent roasted character. I mean, everything was there. It was dynamite.
I appreciate that. And, it's funny, we're going to be talking about the beer, the Belgian quad version of our gluten-free offering. You talk about not being able to tell the difference between a GF beer or a traditional beer, in this case, a Belgian style quad. You'd be hard pressed. You'd really be hard pressed to say this is definitively a gluten-free beer. It turned out fantastic.
So there are a couple of really unique things about BC Brewery and your location. Did it used to be a bus depot or something? Like, it's this huge space with great lines painted on the ground. Like, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that, and also your dispensing system is a little non-traditional and kind of set an example of how draft could be dispensed to consumers for not only yourselves, but also for a couple of other breweries that have opened in the state.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, first, back on the whole warehousing area that we're in, yes, it was a area where buses were brought in and they were detailed, from what I understand. So, the bus would be pulled in. We actually have spots on the floor that say front of the bus, back of the bus. We left them there because it's so cool. And basically think of like, I guess like a chop shop, or, just a restoration type shop. They would pull these buses in and do all sorts of work on them to either modify them or get them back into shape or whatever the case was. But it's a huge space. Far as I know, we're the biggest tap room in Maryland right now as far as square footage.
I wouldn't doubt that at all. I'm sorry.
I said that's why our windows are so big, because that's how they were able to get the buses in here. That's why we have huge windows that would allow buses to be able to pull on in and get work done and pull on out.
Yeah, you guys have a lot of really great light in that building, and it's expansive, and it doesn't feel like it's empty, because you've used the space in a way that lets people come in and be a part of their experience, playing cornhole or enjoying themselves at the tables that are there. So I just wanted to bring that up. And then if you could tell us about your draft system and kind of what the idea was there, I would love to hear about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I can't take any credit for that. That was Rich, our owner. And when him and I got together, we talked about things we wanted to do here, how we wanted to do them, why we wanted to do them. And for the most part, I was in 100% agreement with him on almost every aspect, until he got to, hey, I got this idea, we're going to do self-serve walls. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't against it. But I said, just from my experience in the industry, I said, just be aware that, I think at best, it'll probably be 20% of our business. And I had to eat crow, because it's the exact opposite. People love the self-serve wall. and for good reason. There's still, we still have the traditional bar where you can come when we're open and get a beer from, the bartender behind the bar. But for the most part, we got a lot of younger couples and younger groups of people coming in here that, they don't want to have to go up to the bar and wait, 5 or 10 minutes to get the attention of a bartender on a very busy night. And, they'll just go up to the wall. Once they learn how the wall works, which is really simple, they fall in love with it, because it's so quick and easy. And then on top of that, the wall actually has eliminated the need. We've never had a sampling platter, nor have we needed to do it, because the wall is our sampling platter. The wall is very accurate in pouring very small amounts of beer. So you can walk up to it, stick your card in, pour half ounce, give it a swirl, try it, especially if it's a style you've never heard of, or it's something that you're like, I don't know if I even want 4-ounce sample of that. And, at that point, you don't like it, you're out half ounce of beer. And the bartenders love it. They don't have to worry about cleaning 50,000 sample glasses. We have one glass in here, and that's for everything. So it's worked out perfect for us. And very few people, once they learn how the wall works, they absolutely love it.
It is a really cool concept, and it gives you some ownership of your experience.
Absolutely.
As a drinker. I also like the idea, and I was asked by a reporter right after the idea of the wall became very popular in the Baltimore region, kind of whether or not there was a concern about the wall, because people could just go up and serve themselves all they want. And the reality is if you order a sample rack, you feel compelled to drink all of it, unless you really dislike what you're getting, right?
Absolutely.
And you're looking at 3 or 4 ounce pours there instead of a half ounce pour to figure out whether or not you like something. And you can try 4 or 5 things at a half ounce. You've had 2-3 ounces of beer, and all of a sudden you just caught up to your first sample on a traditional rack.
That's it. Exactly.
So,
right.
I think people are probably a lot more moderate when they know that every time they're pulling that tap, it's costing them a little bit of money. And if they want to try more, they're going to conserve how much they're taking in.
That's it. The other big concern when we opened from people is, you can pour your own beer. How are you going to control that with, underage drinking or overconsumption? And when you get past the initial curiosity of it, you then realize, once the facts are out, that it's actually a double control. Traditional tap rooms, bars, whatever, you're basically at the mercy of your educated beer tender to make certain, to card and make certain assumptions on, someone being impaired or getting close to that. What the beer wall allows us to do, somebody must check in and show us their ID before we issue them a card that works on the wall. We also put a default amount of beer that one person can pour. At that point, the wall shuts off and basically says, just go see your beer tender. It doesn't say you're cut off. Go see. At that point, the beer tenders, with their knowledge, they've all been through tip certification. They then make a judgment call. Obviously, if someone seems to be, over consuming, they can let a manager know, and we can take care of that. Although I don't think we've ever run into that. The one thing we do run into, and it's understandable and welcome, is when someone comes in, like from a business or something, and he's purchasing beers for a whole bunch of people. Hey, this is one card, but I'm buying for 5 people. Then we can see that, and we can up right from the computer console. We can up that amount to an appropriate amount.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then from an operations perspective, just this conversation's kicking things off, and I've had the chance to talk with Rich a little bit in the past. In fact, I actually had a pretty long meeting with him before he opened BC Brewery. He came and picked my brain a little bit about what a good flow was for customers and things like that, and kind of told me about his ideas for this brewery. And I was just blown away by how analytical Rich comes across. So I imagine the data that he can get from this wall must just make him like the happiest camper in the world.
You hit the nail right on the head. I can't even add anything to that.
Okay. And I'm a numbers guy too, so I think that's really cool. I think that this is a whole new operational approach to operating a tasting experience for people, and I think that's really cool.
Absolutely.
And it's great for us because as the brewers, we get a list of the top ounces poured. So then we can see like, oh, wow, like on this day, they really like this style beer, or seems like this new beer is being poured a lot. Maybe that's something we should bring back into our rotation. So it allows us to plan for what we brew and how we serve it.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
awesome.
Yeah, I mean, again, we've only been open for about 2 years, but we've done a lot of twists and turns, and good twists and turns since we've opened. Initially we had the thought that we'd have very little to no mainstays, and we've because we're really dedicated to making sure we keep a little bit of everything on tap at all times. I use this example all the time, but the wife and I will go out to tap rooms, to beer bars, to restaurants, and she's a craft beer drinker, but she is not a hop fan. So we go out and we'll go to a bar and they'll have 12 taps, 9 of them are some way, shape, or form of an IPA. And then, maybe the other 2 or 3 are your macros. She's like, I got nothing to drink here. I want a porter, I want a brown ale, I want a stout. And, from day one, I've made sure that I'm going to take care of our brethren, because I'm a hophead myself, although, I love almost all the styles, but I want to make sure we take care of people that, are either done with the IPAs for a while or just want to change. That's a beautiful thing about beer. We can, depending on your mood, the time of year, what you're eating, the sky's the limit.
Your favorite beer is always the one you're drinking, right?
That's it. You know it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to give a couple of quick shout outs. We've got some industry friends in the chat right now. Mike Clements from Idiom Brewing in Frederick has joined us. What's going on, Mike?
Hey,
Kendrick
Mike.
Doolin, he's on. He's a huge Maryland beer fan and supporter. And Greg Levy from Monocacy Brewing Company is on.
Awesome.
So, got a couple guys from Frederick all saying hi.
Cool.
All right, what do you got for us beer-wise? Let's talk beer. It's Friday afternoon. People are ready to kind of unwind a little bit.
You know it. Yeah. The one thing that I think COVID-19 has done is create a lot of day drinking. And I guess there's nothing wrong with that. The first one we're going to do is the light one. This is a beer that we've named Take This and Call Me in the Morning. It's our version of an American light lager. We brewed this for those, what did we used to call them back in the day? The transition beer drinkers. And it's taken off pretty well. Light in body, we do use some corn and rice in this beer, which, as you know, Jim, 5-10 years ago, if you said that, the world would, that you'd be shunned. But now, everybody's adding the adjuncts into the beers, which is a good thing. Embrace all the grains and ingredients you can do in a beer. So here it is. I'm going to hold it up. There you go. I think you can see that. So we don't filter here, but that beer dropped pretty damn nice. And this comes in at around 5% and a very low 12 BU. So it's all just in the refreshing quality of the beer, easy to drink, boat soda, if you will. Lawnmower beer, and with a changing of the season, and hopefully once all this is over, this is going to be something I think a lot of people are going to consume in maybe a little bit larger amounts than they could, say, a double IPA or something of that nature.
I've kind of rebounded from my love of big, assertive hoppy beers, and I'm really liking my place settled back in the world of crisp, defined lagers.
And I hear that constantly. And, for years, a couple of my guys that I used to work with, brewers, they felt that way for a long time. And I know a lot of them are doing styles like this right now to please, one could say to please, some of the transition beer drinkers, but the other one's to please ourselves, because these are great beers. And, they're hard to make, as you know. The saying in the industry has always been one of the hardest style of beers to make is an American premium light lager. There's no room for error. There's no room to hide technical flaws. So, I enjoy making these because they're challenging.
Sorry, I'm getting blown up in our Slack channel right now. I'm trying to turn off my notifications so it doesn't blast your speakers out.
So yeah, basically though, what you're going to get from this is what you would expect from a nice, clean, crisp adjunct lager. You know, a nice malty breadiness, light, tiny bit of bitterness to balance. Finish is crisp, refreshing, clean, and you know, just makes you want to go back and take another sip. And before you know it, you know, the 16-ounce can is gone.
There's no problem with that. How is that selling? Did it come out right when all this happened?
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, our plan was just like most of our beers, because we're a tap room and the bulk of our sales up until COVID was, you know, right here. We, like we're all doing in the industry, we had to, you know, hit the brakes and look and adjust and adapt. So we decided to can a bunch. In fact, if you see, it's our generic can. We don't even have its official label ready. And luckily for people that understand beer and our loyal customers, they're okay with that. They, in fact, embrace it. So,
first edition. You get the coveted first edition of the beer when you get the.
There you go.
Yeah.
The regular
Collector's
label.
item.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it's been embraced well for the week or two that we've had it on. Yeah. Time will tell. But so far, yeah, I think we're probably going to keep it on as a regular beer, at least through the spring, summer, early fall months.
Awesome. That's
okay.
Refreshing to hear, no pun intended.
Yes. Well, you know, the other thing that's refreshing that I've been seeing and hearing a lot of, and, you know, we're all, again, not to beat a dead horse, we're all in this predicament together. And it's like, what do you put in the tanks? You know, you're not going to be brewing back-to-back IPAs, especially if you want them fresh. So I think myself, and I'm sure a lot of the other tap rooms and brew pubs out there and brewers, we're starting to gear up on our high gravity beers and our vintage aging beers. So stuff that we're going to be sticking in barrels. I just got a Doppelbock started, and I think what's going to be beautiful about when this one and many other high gravity lagers especially get released in the next several months, they're going to be fantastic, because sometimes I truly believe in this industry that that style of beer sometimes is rushed for one reason or another. So, you know, this beer is going to get its full 8 to 10 weeks of lagering, and I just can't wait. It's plus it's one of those styles that are going to satisfy my wife and those malt heads. So I think it's going to be awesome.
They do exist. Anybody
Yes.
that doesn't think they do, trust us.
That's right.
All right. So the next beer in the lineup looks like it's an interesting one. I like the name.
Yes. Another generic can. We're oh, I grabbed the wrong one. Hold it. Non-generic can. Fugly Duckling.
There you go.
So Fugly Duckling is our kettle sour that we put pureed blackberries in and some hibiscus flowers. And the name came about after we initially got the brew pretty much done, because
It's not pretty.
Not a very pretty beer. You know, not clear, nor should it be, and the color is not as beautiful as, you know, say that Doppelbock that I was talking about, or a nice amber or red ale. So, you know, where it lacks in appearance, it makes up in taste. It's one of our biggest selling kettle sours right now, and people are really enjoying it. It gets a lot of pureed blackberries right in the vessel, and hibiscus flowers go in and gives it a little bit more of that, you know, reddish putrid looking color.
Get that pinkish punch.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So Jim, or Beth, maybe you can share kind of with the audience. The fruited sour craze is a big thing right now. I think that anybody who's paying attention to beer trends is aware of that. What is a kettle sour for people that don't know, and how does that vary from how sours traditionally were made?
Oh, that's a great question, because that leads me into something that I want to talk about. So kettle sours compared to traditional sours are kind of like the name would say. The souring process actually happens in the kettle rather than some other type of device, usually a thoder or some type of barrel. The big benefit there for the brewers is they can pretty much do kettle sours in their brew house with very little to no concern about contaminating their entire brew house with either one or many strains of lacto or anything else that might get loose in the brew house, because these bacteria, these bugs tend to be very hardy, and even sometimes to the best cleaning and to the best QA, they can get loose. And sadly, it's kind of like COVID-19. Once it gets loose, you can be in big trouble, because now all of a sudden that clean, crisp lager that you just brewed has some funk going on. And we like funk beers, but we don't want all the beers to be funky, especially the ones that are not supposed to be. But so we do kettle sours, and we've been doing them for quite a while now, and we've been enjoying them. But one thing that's in the very early stages of planning here at BCB is we're actually acquired some space in this same warehouse a couple 100 yards down from the brewery in a separate building. With that said, we have plans to start doing very small batches of wild sours. And that's going to be a lot of fun, letting things just run wild, seeing what they turn into. And it's exciting. It's just going to be fun experimenting and going crazy with different bugs.
It's stanky, but in the best possible way.
And just for people who may have taken brewery tours and kind of heard how the process works, the souring happens between the mash and the boil, correct?
Yeah, well, the specific way we do it, and most breweries do it, is you go through a traditional mash. You send your wort over into the boil kettle. Technically, I guess some brewers only take it up to about 180, 185 Fahrenheit. We don't take any chances. We actually take it all the way up to boiling for just a few minutes, just to make sure everything's killed off in there. And to the layman, they might say, well, what are you worried about? You're inoculating it with bugs anyway. Who cares if it has bugs in it? We want the right bugs. If you don't boil or kill the bugs that are existent in that wort, you're going to get most likely unfavorable flavors and aromas. And you don't want to go through all that trouble to produce something that you're going to have to end up dumping. So by sending it through that high heat for a short amount of time, and then immediately and quickly cooling it down to a temperature, our temperature that we use is a little over 100 degrees, between 100 and 110 Fahrenheit. And then once you get it down to that temperature, you then throw in your controlled bacteria. For the people that understand what strains are out there, we use different ones. We're fond of Delbrecki. We have used Lacto brevis in here, and it's fun to experiment with the different strains of Lacto, because they're each one gives its own little nuances as far as flavors and aroma. But then, once you pitch it, you're basically just watching your pH. Your pH kind of dictates how sour a beer is going to get. You can take it down to, say, roughly 3.6 on a pH scale, and you might get a little tartness, a little sour. You take it lower, which we have done on purpose for one of our dry hop sours, and it's mouth puckering. And so you got that nice range of just slightly tart to completely lemon mouth puckering, and then everything in between.
It's funny when it comes to the sours. When I was first diagnosed with celiac, I didn't like I love beer, but I didn't really like sours. And then once they told me, all right, well, you can never have beer again, I was like, well, I only want a sour beer now. That's the only thing I ever want. And so we do make a cantaloupe sour. I brewed it today, actually, and it's going to sit over for the weekend and sour itself up nice. But I didn't realize that I would like sours, and it's delicious. And I've met a lot of gluten-free folks who have said, like, I didn't even think I could ever try a sour, and now I know I like it, or now I know I don't like it, which is fine with me. I mean, if you don't like the style, you don't like the style, but now you know you don't like the style, which I'm really happy now that we're able to do all these different styles of beer. Folks can know a little bit more than just an IPA or a blonde. We're really kind of developing the gluten-free market in regards to flavors and tastes and styles of beer.
So there's a question that just came through the comments about pre-souring a kettle sour. Essentially, the kettle souring process is how the souring occurs. I do know that some breweries have had to add a little bit of lactic or something to kick the pH down. But
we have done that when necessary. We have lactic acid in house. But what we have found with most of our kettle sours, as long as you have a a grain in there that will naturally bring the pH down under normal mashing protocol that we really haven't had to use it. I've pitched lacto into the kettle after we cooled it down at pHs of 5.2 and have had no problems. Would I go much higher than 5.2 or 5.3? Probably not. I'd probably add a little lactic. And what'll cause that pH to be a little higher, the general rule of thumb here, but is, the lighter grains you use, a lighter style of beer, the potential higher your pH is going to be to start off with. Beers like stouts, not saying we're going to do a sour stout, but just to give you an example, whenever you're using roasted barley or chocolate malt or any of the like, they have the natural ability to actually bring that mash pH down even lower, sometimes as low as 5 point, I've actually seen some in the high 4s. But yeah, to answer your question, 5.2 I've pitched, and it's all about quantity of pitching too. Make sure you have a good starter there. The more you pitch, the quicker the souring happens and the more effective it is. And then there's a few other techniques. I don't want to call them proprietary by any means, but we do some things while we're sending from mash over to kettle that we think help as well.
We call those tricks of the trade.
Tricks of the trade. I like
that. Another Frederick brewery operator popped in. Carly from Attaboy is here.
Oh, cool.
Good crowd today. I like seeing all these familiar faces popping in to see you guys. This is awesome.
We love it. Yeah, absolutely.
And then I guess the last point that I was going to ask about with the kettle soured beers, this isn't something that happens within an afternoon. It's usually over the course of a couple of days where the kettle sour really kicks off. So you're talking about temperature control over a couple of days in a vessel that you should be using to produce stuff. So this actually, if it's not scheduled the right way, can cause a backlog in your brew schedule.
Absolutely. Right now, as we know, we kind of got a lot of time on our hands. But yeah, when we decide to get a couple batches of sour going, it's literally at least 2 batches, if not more, and we keep doing them because if we're going to commit to tying up the brew house for a batch, it's really not that much harder to do 2 or 3 batches back to back and just get them all out of the way. So yeah, that's going to be a concern with every brewery unless they have a dedicated brew house where they're able to not worry about that.
Alrighty. I've got the link up there for people to look at the Fugly Duckling. The artwork's great. I love it.
Yes.
That's our taproom manager, Sarah. Yep, she's awesome.
Yeah.
Good job, Sarah.
I'm sure she's on right now.
I know you're listening from somewhere because I see you answering questions in the comments. Phil's also saying, do you experience much of a problem with head retention in sours?
No, with sours, it's a little diminished compared to some of the non-sour beers, definitely, but not really. Where we actually see that is with our gluten-free beers. Just the general nature of malted millet and the other ingredients, malted rice that we use quinoa, we use buckwheat. For what it's worth, we don't use sorghum. Not saying sorghum is bad. A lot of gluten-free breweries use it. But early on, kind of backtracking here, early on even before we decided to go ahead and dedicate our 2-barrel to gluten-free beers, that's where Beth came in and she played a vital role in us deciding to pull the trigger and let's go for this and see what happens. So one of her jobs at that point was to purchase some of the, for lack of better words, national gluten-free bands that, she's very familiar with because that's all she'd search high and low to find a couple of the national brands. And again, not going to name them, it's not important, but she brought them in and I'm like, this is why I don't like gluten-free beer.
It was a very, very strategic plan. I kind of put it in his mind. I would bring in a beer and I'd say, Jim, after a long day of work, I go home and I drink this beer, and he would try it and he would say, I don't think I like this one. And I said, you're right, Jim, let's make a better one. And so then being competitive, he was like, yeah, we can make a better one. And that's kind of how I intercepted into his brain inception.
Yeah, and you know what transpired from that, and a little bit of it was dumb luck. A lot of these beers, luckily, they listed their ingredients, and we knew what ingredients we had to work with, as every brewer does, and we noticed through some test batching and from what was on the cans that sorghum was a primary ingredient, and we then thought, is this what's causing those flavors, mouthfeel, and even to some extent aromas that we didn't like? And we decided, we think maybe, and so we didn't even go with it. We just went with our primary grain that we use is millet. Some beers get more rice than millet, and these are malted. So we get them from Grouse and Eckert, and these are dedicated gluten-free facilities that all they make is gluten-free malted grains. And you might say, oh, well, they're malted. That's awesome. So you just basically make them just like you would a regular beer. Even though they're malted, their diastatic power is very, very minimal. So they need help, and a lot of it. So mashing here for GF beers is a lot longer than our traditional beers. It's a long day, and that whole long day basically is all within the mashing scheme. Everything else is about the same.
That's where
So
That, I think, was very helpful information. Seems like Phil in the comments might be a brewery in planning, and he's saying that this is great to know. His wife is gluten-free, and he's been looking for gluten-free options and the potential
Awesome.
of brewing some gluten-free options on his own. So that's great.
And see, that's great to hear. Yeah, that's great to hear, because again, you know, I was familiar with GF beers many years ago, and I knew some breweries that did it, but I never really had the desire or thought to do them, because I'm like, you know, they're not going to sell. They're not what people are looking for. But I tell you, it's been a pleasant surprise to see our gluten-free community has been, although somewhat of a minority, they are dedicated. We get people coming hours that drive here, even through this pandemic, to pick up a couple cases to hold them over, because their choices and their out there are limited to none.
Quick shout out to Kevin Smith, the writer of the Brutist column in the Frederick News Post. He's popped on.
Hey, Kevin.
Always a big supporter of Maryland beer. You have a great interloper in the background drinking a delicious beverage.
That's Mr. Joe Valentino.
Herding Cats IPA.
This is the guy.
This is the guy. He's a salesman by trade, obviously.
Yeah.
He's the guy to tell you where the beer is found outside of these four walls. We know it's out there, but I know of a couple of our stores, and we're very appreciative of them, but I don't have them memorized.
Yeah.
Joe, you get 35 seconds at the end of this to rattle off every retail account.
He's been rehearsing all day,
Okay,
so don't worry.
There's only like 20, but
20 great ones.
That's right.
All right. Let's move on to the next beer. This is an interesting approach to a style. Just looking at the name.
Yes, this is an IPA that we call the New Zealand Mohow Monster. And I thought of that, there you go. I thought of that name after doing some research on it. I'm a big fan of New Zealand hops, always have been, and probably always will. And I was like, you know, I've used Motueka, one of my favorite New Zealand hops, in several beers. In fact, our Hop Love, formerly known as Momo, that was half the Mo. That was a beer IPA that we still make. We just call it Hop Love now, and that's Motueka and Mosaic. But I'm like, you know what? Let's do an all New Zealand beer, and decided to do it, and it turned out fantastic. Just what you would expect from those New Zealand flavors and aromas. Very, very tropical. It's weird. In your face, but somewhat delicate. So it's not as pungent as, you know, you would get from the majority of the big US hops that we all love, like Citra, Mosaic, Amarillo, but it's great because you get all these tropical notes. And what I found real interesting and fun is really starting to marry, you know, these 4 or 5 different New Zealand hops that go into this beer. And all of them are late edition hops. So this beer gets all the hops very late stage in the boil, in the whirlpool, and then again in dry hopping. And I also wanted to make it a drinkable IPA. You know, I do love my double IPAs and triple IPAs, but I wanted this one to be something at 6.3%, where you could have more than one easily and not get palate fatigue with it.
One of the really cool things about the way we serve our beer is they don't go into kegs unless they need to go into kegs. They go into serving vessels, kind of like a uni tank. So what we're able to do after brewing it and dry hopping it and sending it over to the serving vessel, we then will take a mucilin bag and fill it with hops. So it's a continuous dry hop. You're constantly getting those aroma and all that flavor because it's still happening in the tank. So you'll try it after we first send it over and you'll say, wow, I can taste these hops, and then you'll wait a little bit and maybe a week later you'll try it and say, wow, this one's coming through a little bit more than it was last week. And it's just a constant evolution of flavors and taste, which I think is very neat.
That's really cool because it does give you an opportunity to appreciate the beer a new way the second time you have it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
The other comment that I have there is I had Zach Lloyd from Wardaka on last week, and he was talking about how drinking off of a fermenter, off of a serving tank, has like spoiled his ability to ever drink beer again. Because once you have that experience, why do you want to go to a vessel that it's been transferred to and moved somewhere else? It's like
you're absolutely right. We do a lot of cornhole tournaments up here. I went from being a novice backyard cornhole thrower to now, I got 4 or 5 sets of bags, and I try to enter as many tournaments as I can. So
number 1 in the country right here.
That's what I'm trying for
Number
now.
1.
But it's funny because while we're playing here, you'll see me, if you're here, go into the cooler and with an empty glass and come back out of the cooler with a full glass. But nothing like drinking off a serving vessel.
So Jim, you pointed out with the light lager, and it looks like with that also that you've got some really nice clarity and brilliance in the beer. You said you're not filtering anything?
We do not filter here. Nope.
So are you just resting beer, or do you fine?
The majority of them just get rested. If we do have a problem and we want to clarify it, we do use biofine occasionally, but not as a normal everyday thing. Just depends on the style.
Sure.
I have a love-hate relationship with, I shouldn't say love-hate, but I appreciate the traditional styles and I want to keep them the way they are and should be. But then again, let's get crazy and make some weird stuff and invent new stuff. But if it's a style that history has dictated should be a certain way, I feel the need to make sure it stays that way.
That's an honorable pursuit.
Hey, that sounds good to me. Yeah.
And Phil's asking if you just tend to set those beers aside in a bright, or do you just let them drop out in the fermenter and then transfer into the serving tanks?
A little bit of both, but mainly, yeah. Luckily, we have, our fermenters are obvious uni tanks. We do have 2 bright beer tanks. So we usually try to reserve those for our lagers to just give them additional time to mature and drop in naturally. And then that's a great thing too about the serving vessels is we'll send them over to the serving vessels, but that doesn't mean once they're sent over and carbonated that they immediately go on. Sometimes, again, depending on the beer, depending on the style, they may sit in those serving vessels for a little bit just to naturally drop out, and then we'll blow it down a little bit. So yeah, it's a loaded question. It all just depends. But I tell you one thing, not having to use a centrifuge or a diatomaceous earth filter is wonderful. And plus, it's just wonderful for the beer. It really is. It's, no flavor is stripped. Very little to no oxidation can happen as long as your technical practices is good as far as, priming, making sure everything's purged out with CO2. The less mechanical equipment used to produce the beer, the better.
And you're not overbuilding a recipe and overbuying ingredients that you're going to be taking out of the finished product.
Exactly.
Cool. I like that holistic approach.
Well, there's a reason why it was done that way from the early days. One could argue, well, that technology wasn't available, but, sometimes in certain cases, I think technology is a little more harmful than it is helpful. So not to mention, who the hell wants to spend, 6 figures on a damn centrifuge? I know
everybody that wants a nice hobby beer with great brilliance.
That's right. Exactly.
There aren't too many of those anymore. We were talking about that last week too.
Yeah. But it's funny. I got, I'm sure you know them, Jim, you've seen around, but friends that I've had for 25 years when I first started homebrewing. And one of the guys, he made a hat and I was tempted to wear it, but I said, nah, It's a hat that kind of looks like Trump's, and it says "Make ales clear again."
Gotta love it.
You gotta love it.
Gotta
Even
love
if you don't agree, you gotta love it.
I think it's a great thing, though, that we are kind of seeing like waves of how the craft beer consumer is showing preference. You know, it used to be that, oh my gosh, that's too hoppy. It is unapproachable. How dare you bring a beer up to like 40 BUs?
Right.
You know, and then from there, it kind of went to, well, I'm not drinking a beer unless it's like 115
Right.
BUs and I cannot taste anything for the rest
Right.
of the night.
Unless it rips the enamel off your teeth. Right.
That's it. And then it like real quick fell back into this world of like, well, now let's see what we can do when we bring really sweet aspects of some preferences in food and beverage, and let that mingle with what's going on that's with beer.
Exactly.
And we have this whole world of people who are now like crossing over their preferences, and it's really cool to see.
It's absolutely cool. And again, that's that beautiful blend of honoring tradition and being innovative. And I think there's room to meld the two together very easily. You don't have to be constantly pushing the boundaries with craziness just to do it. You know, if you're doing it, do it for a reason. Do it because you truly believe that end product is going to turn out good. Don't do it because you think it's cool to add some weird ingredient that nobody ever heard of into a beer just because they haven't heard of it.
Well, and I think with this New Zealand, how's that pronounced? Mohow?
Mohow, yes.
With your Mohow monster.
Yeah, he's basically, if you look him up, he's the New Zealand version of Bigfoot.
Oh, okay.
Supposedly he was a badass. All right. He's out there supposedly, and he's Bigfoot with these big ass claws. And yeah, legend is he's ripped a lot of people apart.
We fell down a rabbit hole that day when we were looking at
That's right.
My comment was going to be that I think it's interesting that you mentioned those are all late edition hops, which is keeping the BUs down, which is kind of a stylistic approach that you see with a lot of the hazier IPAs now.
Absolutely.
So you're limiting the impact of bitterness. You're bringing out all these really great aromatic opportunities from the hops that are really going to open that bouquet up when the drinker is approaching it. But then you have this brilliance and clarity of what you would find in an old-fashioned India Pale Ale.
Exactly. Right.
So,
a little bit of everything. Exactly.
I think that's great, man.
It's calculated that beers, because of all the late additions, tremendous amount, but we're only up at around 24 BU. And again, that's calculated for me. It's perception. It tastes that way. You can tell there that bitterness is not overwhelming. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's not overwhelming as, your traditional West Coast style IPA where it's up at, 60, 70.
For anybody that's watching, it looks like we might go a couple of minutes long today. We've got 2 more beers to go, but the conversation has been good, so I'm not going to cut this one off short. And I'm really excited to have Beth present the next 2 beers.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. So
and Beth, I'll give you as much of a hard time as I gave Jim, so don't worry about it.
Oh boy. What we're about to try is You Had Me at Merlot. It's the second in our series of wine beer hybrids. So it is 49% beer, or no, 51% beer, 49% wine. Numbers. It's obviously a Merlot base, and you will really get some dark fruit, dark tannins. I put a little chocolate milled in there because I always find that chocolate always complements red wine well. So if you're drinking it at home, be sure to eat a chocolate cake or chocolate ice cream. This is me allowing you to do that in case you needed an excuse. It really complements it well. It's lightly carbonated, so it's not carbonated like you would a beer. It's a hybrid. It's a happy ground in between the two. Nice dark in color, like a Merlot would be, but it has a little bit of hops for the beer, and so I think it's a perfect combination of the two, beer and wines.
So how are these styles traditionally made? Are you bringing the juice in and adding it to the wort stream out of the kettle?
Yes.
And then they ferment together?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And is it all done with, I learned this the other day and I didn't realize it, but apparently Saccharomyces cerevisiae is how they're fermenting wine. I always thought they had their own wine strains. I was always under the impression that Sac C was a beer strain.
Right.
But so you're using one yeast strain, or do you use several yeasts?
It depends on the wine. So for the red wines, we use this one red specific strain, and we just, like Jim mentioned earlier, made a Pinot the other day, and we used a more white kind of oriented strain.
So these strains are known, even though they're very similar, just like the plethora of beer strains out there. They're known to bring out certain nuances of certain, certain different bases. So some of them are very complementary of a white wine as opposed to a red, or vice versa.
It's delicious. If you can, even though it's not in cans, you can still order them in crowlers. We do 32-ounce crowlers, and you can go on our website and you can place an order for it, and we'll bring it out to your car. It's hands-free delivery kind of thing. You pull up curbside, and you too can also have a You Had Me at Merlot. So even though it's not canned, you can still drink it.
And there's a link right there in the comments to get your crowlers. Don't skip it.
It's delicious.
Buddy of mine who I've enjoyed a couple of very nice, delicious beers with, Will, is complimenting you guys on your approach to keeping things traditional and funky at the same time. Says that's probably, you're an example of why people are able to explore new styles and old styles and appreciate all of them. Andrew says that the New Zealand beer is really, really good. The last time he had it was in the tap room right before the quarantine. He said he's also a huge fan of Hop Love and Herding Cats.
You can pick all those up in cans today.
He's a smart man.
There you go, Andrew. Put your order in, buddy.
And the reason we wanted to make it gluten-free is because since wine is already gluten-free, why not stick true to those who are able to drink it? I'm also a really big fan of wine, so I like that I can drink it, but that's beside the point. It's kind of it's like a two birds, one stone kind of thing for those folks who aren't really big beer people, which is totally okay. You kind of are now able to come into the tap room, and if you only drink wine, now you can have a wine. If you are gluten-free and you like wine, now you can have that too. And it's not just for gluten-free folks, it's for anyone. I mean, it's a very good hybrid. Yeah.
I think that's cool. You're hitting on different ways to satiate demand from a population that kind of has been overlooked in the industry for a while.
For a long while.
I mean, it makes sense because beer is what, barley, and gluten is barley. So I do understand when I tell people that I'm a brewer, I'm also gluten-free. They kind of want to know if I understand what beer is, and I know why I work there. But our big thing is that BCB we are building a community through beer, and we want to allow a way to include the entire community in that process. So if that means making a beer that different people can drink, then that's what we're going to do, because we really do care about the whole community aspect of beer. I mean, currently we can't have the whole community in the tap room right now, but you from your 6 feet at your house can drink a beer and still be part of that beer community.
No, I think it's great. I am not a person who has a need or desire often for a gluten-free product, fortunately for myself. But if I were, like you, Beth, I imagine that it's great to be able to go into a place and know there are multiple options instead of just, there may be one thing on the menu.
Yeah, exactly. It's great. I mean, it opens a bunch of new doors. So maybe a couple where one person's gluten-free. Now this is a new date night location. Now it's not, can I go there? Okay, I'll sit and watch you drink. Now we can both go there, and now we both can drink.
That's awesome.
And along those same lines, kind of what we already talked about, just on a traditional beer side is, we're always going to have at least a porter, at least a stout, a hoppy and a non-hoppy red ale, something other than, okay, we got, a session IPA, an IPA, 3 double IPAs, 2 triple IPAs, and that's it.
And then just a tap that dispenses hops.
There you go. Just straight hops.
Yeah,
right
just
in your
only
mouth.
hops. Everyone gets a chance to drink a beer.
Yeah, we're thinking about doing IV hop juice. Just haven't figured out all the details yet for those ones that just can't get enough hops.
I like it. Not too many questions about the hybrid. We've got a couple comments that it sounds delicious. If you haven't tried one of these beer wine hybrids yet, I would highly recommend giving it a whirl. First time I experienced one, I was kind of blown away by how approachable it is. The one that I had drank a lot more like a wine than it did a beer, but you could definitely tell.
Too. Yeah.
Well, there you go. You can definitely tell it's made for the beer drinker to appreciate wine.
Right.
Yes,
I think that wraps it up real nice.
Really good.
Absolutely.
We'll probably use that when we're promoting.
Kevin Smith, the Brutist, is asking, do you find that you have customers that shy away from any of the gluten-free offerings simply because of the gluten-free notation?
So my big thing, and like when I would bring the beers in, it's kind of a bummer to taste something and say it's kind of obvious that this is gluten-free beer. Like that's not fun for anyone, I don't think. And so we really focused on making a really good beer that just so happens to be gluten-free. I didn't want to make a gluten-free beer that was okay. I wanted to make a beer that, oh, and by the way, it's gluten-free. And I think since we have the self-pour wall, people are now able to, I'm not going to buy a whole pint of it, but I am willing to try a taste of it just to make sure it's something I would like. So I think the self-serve wall really allows us to be more experimental and more trying and offer different types of drinks other people usually wouldn't drink. And after we make a beer, some of his highest praise is, oh, I wouldn't know that's gluten-free. And that's like something that I always love to hear that.
And that's very refreshing to say. I mean, I think any brewer, any beer drinker that can tell the difference right off the bat, they know. They're like, see, that's why I don't like those gluten-free beers. When you put a beer in front of you and you're like, can't tell. That's high praise. Regardless if you like the style or not, if you can't tell, that's praise.
I really like that statement. We brewed a great beer that just so happens to be gluten-free.
Yep.
I think that there were a lot of breweries that went through kind of a similar thing with low alcohol table beers or session ales. There was some resistance to seeing those beers on a wall in a tap room when it's like, hey, here's one at 4 or 3%. And, the beer is a great beer that just so happens to be low in alcohol.
Right.
Versus, so that's a good question. And I'm glad it was asked because that's probably a question that has to be asked by not only you as producers, but as your sales team and your marketing team. How do we position this and how do we get it to pick up in the market?
Absolutely. Kevin's always good with asking good questions.
Yeah, he is. It's almost like he's done it as a profession.
Yeah, like he knows something about beer, right?
And Kevin, I think that Beth was able to answer your follow-up question, which was, if so, how do you approach the customer? I think that the goal there is that the customer is going to drink a great tasting beer that happens to be gluten-free.
Right.
Cool. And with all of the gluten-free beer talk, the last one is a gluten-free beer, right?
That's it. Yep.
My pride and joy. When I was first diagnosed, which was about 2.5 years ago, I was not a happy camper, understandably, especially because I would drink beer often and then told, well, you can't have that. It's kind of like, why? Like, that doesn't make sense. But the beer style I would absolutely miss the most is a Belgian quad. I love Belgians. I love the complexity of it. I love how every strain is different. I love every part of the Belgian. And we made a Belgian quad, and it's my pride and joy. It's everything I've ever wanted in a beer. And again, like, Jim's opinion means the world to me. And when he tried it, he said, this is a good beer. I didn't know it was gluten-free. That was like, that's how if you want to know if it's a good beer, when Jim says it's a good beer, it's a good beer. And so you have to absolutely try this one. It's made, the big problem with being able to make a gluten-free Belgian quad is the yeast. A lot of yeast is cultivated on beer or is on gluten. And so if it's cultivated on gluten, it's not gluten-free. Finally, after a long waited time, a lot of gluten-free home brewers were kind of saying, yeah, I really like my gluten-free pale ale. I really like my gluten-free lagers, but I really would like a gluten-free Belgian. This one company started making gluten-free yeast, started growing gluten-free yeast. And so we bought it from a gluten-free homebrew website, gluten-free homebrew, and we got it in. And since it was made for a home brewer, we had to step it up, and we stepped it up, and we really made it shine. So it's amber colored. You really get those fruity flavors, those dark cherry, dark plum kind of things. It's millet heavy, and it's it's delicious. If if I had one tasting note, it would be it's good. But that's the more detailed note is all those things. It's very good. So if you like Belgians, come get it. If you have never tried a gluten-free, if you're gluten-free and never tried a Belgian, come get it. This is what a Belgian tastes like. It just brings me so much joy. So
I didn't even consider propagation and growth
yeah,
with cultivating yeast for a brewery, the process that has to go into it from a gluten-free perspective. That didn't even cross my mind.
it's everywhere.
Well, and that's the thing. Exactly.
It's
Gluten's
everywhere.
And, there's a huge, as we kind of talked about, there's a huge difference to people that have a gluten allergy or have celiac, difference between being gluten reduced and gluten free. To you and me, Jim, not a big deal. But if you have celiac, gluten reduced is just not good enough because it could hurt you. And, that's what we took into account right away once we were talking to Beth and decided to go this route. And we're like, if we're going to do it, we're not going to cut corners. We're going to make sure this is 100% done to the best of our ability. And that's why we got in some very expensive bench testing tests. They're not cheap. And, they work similar to kind of like a strep test or any other type of bench test where, Beth, after the product is done, at every step, we'll check it. It takes what, 5 minutes or so?
Yeah, about 5-10 minutes.
And it kind of works like a pregnancy test. So, you'll get your little strip. It'll say free, trace, or you're screwed.
Yes.
So we make sure, and knock on wood, we've gotten free every time. We haven't even had a trace, which is nice.
So can you guys share a little bit about the difference in approaching a beer from building the recipe and producing it in a gluten-free environment compared to brewing and producing a beer that would be gluten reduced?
Yeah. I'll start off and then I'll let Beth take over with her comments. The biggest thing is dedication of equipment. So, once we decided to do this, initially you think, okay, well, I can take a brew house or, even on a homebrew level, and I can dedicate this fermenter to it and it'll be good. Well, that's great, but did you think about your mill? Because that mill is contaminated already. And you really need to think of every step from the minute that grain arrives at your doorstep all the way till the minute that beer goes into a can. So we decided, with this 2-barrel system, we're going to go ahead, because it initially was our small batch system. So we decided at that point to go ahead, bite the bullet and give this a shot. We ripped everything out that could hold gluten, gaskets, anything that's permeable. Took all that out. We initially, our 2-barrel and our 7-barrel system shared a heat exchanger. That would be the biggest source of contamination other than the mill. So we ordered another small heat exchanger that we solely dedicated to the 2-barrel system. And then, it's just that thought process from your tri-clamp gaskets to your hose to everything else. That just basically keeping that mindset that nothing else that brew house touches can touch this brew house. And at first, I'll tell you, with all the years that I did it, she would have to catch me every once in a while grabbing for the wrong clamps. It's human nature. You don't think about it much. And then once it's instilled in you, it's already there. Yep, can't use those. Got to use the dedicated hose, the dedicated tri-clamp gaskets, everything. Is it overkill with some of the stuff? Maybe. But as long as we keep getting negatives on our bench test, we're good. So.
Luckily, when I started working here about 6 or 7 months after I was diagnosed. So it was all very fresh in my mind. And all the things that I was told I couldn't touch, couldn't do anything. And then walking into a brewery, which is kind of like, why would you? There are a lot of questions by a lot of people, but I was like, no, this is where I should be. This is where I need to be. And the cool thing about it is that how supportive everyone was here, because I said, we have to reach this community. And Jim mentioned like a few times, yeah, you would trip up, but all the other times where he said, no, we have to do it like this. No, we have to do it like that, because that's how we keep it clean. That's how we keep it, no cross-contamination, any of that. And luckily it's just Jim and I in the brew house. So it's our hands are on it, but it's hands that know what to do and how to do it. And we're we're both very cognizant of it all, because, you don't want to make someone sick. We put so much effort into all of this. Why would we taint it? It's a very controlled environment, and I'm just very thankful we can make a product for people to be able to drink and say, I know this is safe and I know I can have it. Because there have been times where I've said, like, I don't know if I really want to drink this, but here I know from the beginning to the end that I'm safe.
And with that said, you guys probably already figured this out. We've dedicated serving vessels and the lines that connect to those serving vessels to the taps that come out of the wall. When you come in here, you'll see that the taps are labeled or wrapped with green tape, which signifies gluten-free. Even all the way down to our crowler and growler fillers, we have separate ones for that, that, they're only used for the gluten-free products.
Yeah. And in addition to that, our SEAL team, which is our gluten-free subsect, that is always SEAL team. That way, if you're in a store and you see something, you say, oh, SEAL team, I know I can have that, and you grab a SEAL team. And so there's no kind of chance of accidentally grabbing a different beer with a similar name. It's if you see the seal, it's safe. And yeah, we put as many precautions as possible, because with this kind of thing, you can't be too careful. And it's been really great to hear that we've all been very supportive of it.
That's incredible, and it's refreshing to know that the ownership of the brewery is behind this. They're behind doing it right.
Yeah.
And I think that should be something that the consumer is encouraged by and is interested in. I find it fascinating the amount of effort that you have to go into thinking about, like Jim said, from grain to glass, how are you making this beer safe for the people that it's meant to satisfy? And I'm glad we had this conversation, because it's kicked off a few really good questions in the comments. Andrew asked, if you did have one pop with like a trace amount of gluten, would you release that as a normal beer?
No, we wouldn't release it, and we wouldn't even release it as a normal beer. No, it would. And again, I mean, that's easy to say, but it's the truth. And we haven't had one yet, but if we do, it'll get dumped.
So if the intent was for it to be a gluten-free beer, it's not going to make its way on draft as just some millet grain, something else.
Nope. I can confidently say nope. If it did, we would be overly excessive about explaining that. But again, that's kind of a moot point. I don't see it ever happening. It'll get dumped. If it happens, it'll get dumped.
I've been to BC Brewery, so I know that the brew house is not optimal for this next question, but maybe there's another step beyond this. Danny's asking whether or not BC Brewery is considered contracting gluten-free beers for anyone else.
No. I mean, the simple answer is no. The reason is, I think I mentioned it, we took our 2-barrel system and we converted that over and made that the gluten-free system. So literally, at best, we're producing 2 barrels, and that's for normal gravity beers. This quad, we didn't get 2 barrels out of it, as you can imagine, because of its gravity. So just in the sheer aspect of just not being able to produce enough, we're also, as we've mentioned here, we do very little kegging. The only kegging that we do here is for vintage beers and for the few times that we actually go out to festivals. But 90% of the time, all of our beer is in serving vessels, which comes out of the wall through the self-pour taps or the regular taps, which are basically 6 to 15 feet apart. So it doesn't get any fresher than that. But going back to contracting, we're just not set up for it. And down the road, would we maybe consider expanding and building a second brew house? Who knows? We'll see what happens after this COVID-19 crap gets past us. So.
If you are gluten-free, just as a sub note, if you are gluten-free, and so our seltzer is gluten-free, and that's in kegs, because it doesn't make sense to put it in a serving vessel when we only do 2 barrels at a time, but that is a gluten-free keg. So additionally, that's just another step. If it does go into a keg and it's gluten-free, that's a specific gluten-free keg, and there's no mix-up when it comes to that. So.
And I'm glad Beth mentioned that real quick to throw something else in. We do seltzers here, and we aged a seltzer in a white wine barrel for about 3 months. So it's got a little bit of white,
Nice.
wine characteristics. And Beth came up with the best freaking name ever. It's called Seltzer in Place.
Oh, nice.
Very
So
proud of that.
we're actually going to be canning this next week.
Yeah.
So
If anybody ever questions whether or not brewers have a sense of humor or are
Every now and
fantastic
then.
with the pun game, you should have all of your answers today.
That's right.
Danny, if you've not been to BC Brewery, the configuration of the brewery and the brew house there is it's built to be probably the most utilitarian brewery I've seen. It's like such a great space. You can turn around and get everything you need within a couple of steps. It takes away from some of the huge, large floor plans and footprints that you see in other breweries, and you get the feel that the only intent is to make sure that the beer is where you need it, when you're there.
Yep. Yep.
So if there were ever
just big enough so when you turn around, you don't bump your head on a sample valve or trip over something. So it's a good size.
It's definitely not breaking any safety standards, but it's,
exactly.
I worked in a brewery in the past where there was a lot of open space, and it's a much different feeling.
Oh yes, very much.
And then Kevin, coming through for Beth, what are the difficulties that you face developing recipes, researching styles, and how do you approach sampling from other breweries?
So for me, I have a very good, so this quad, I loved quads. And so I said, this is what a quad tastes like. I know that this is what a quad tastes like. And then from there, kind of like with any other, if you're doing a barley beer recipe, you say, okay, how do I get to that taste? And you kind of backtrack and you say, well, this grain is more likely to kind of make a biscuity kind of flavor, or this grain has more of an earthy tone to it. And it's kind of similar to how you would with barley beer. It's just to use different ingredients. Is it a bummer that I don't get to try the barley beer recipes? Sure. But is it awesome that I do get to make the gluten-free recipes? Absolutely.
And one thing that I was enlightened by when we got into this venture is, again, as I mentioned earlier, our primary ingredients are millet and rice. Even though the rest, the sack rest, and the whole entire rest process takes dramatically longer, think about it. I guess prior to the highly modified malts that we're all very lucky to have on the barley side of things, with those low modified malts, rest used to go for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. That's where our rests go by necessity. But one thing I was concerned about when we got into this, I'm like, we're going to have to use some type of medium, be it a gluten-free type rice hulls or something, so we keep that bed open. But millet is amazing. If for those of you that don't know what millet looks like, just do a Google search. Real tiny seeds, very small. But what's great is once you crack that millet, and it doesn't take much, but that's another thing. Gap size on your mill. I could go on for an hour on how crazy that crap is, but but once you get that mill dialed in for your specific either millet or rice, there's so much husk material, if you will. Our runoffs are easy, which is really, really refreshing, because I'm like, I don't want to go through a 3-hour rest and then have to fight a stuck mash. But millet really flows nicely, and that's just one of its attributes. And the other thing is, as you know, Jim, I've been doing this a long time, and I love the smell of a good fresh mash. You got to come in here one time and smell the aromas given off by millet. It's for most people, they'll be like, okay, that smells similar. For you, me, most of the people that are watching this, it's night and day, and in a good way, because that millet gives off these aromas that you normally wouldn't get out of a traditional barley mash.
That's awesome.
The Incredible Joe is grabbing some examples, just in case you've never seen what like a malted rice or malted. When I say malt, don't think it's for the gluten-free folks out there. I know malt's a very scary term. It's safe malt, if you will. Malted rice and malted millet. It's completely different than like there, I mean, it comes in an array of flavors.
There you
It's wild, the different colors and all that stuff. So it's
Is that whole kernel?
These
yeah,
are
this
whole
is
kernel.
the rice.
Yes.
Yeah, this is the
Yep.
rice, and it's just I didn't think that you'd be able to get it in all the different kind of types, but I mean, the gluten-free community have come a long way since I guess the beginning. I
And
don't know.
again,
I
those
wasn't
aren't
part of that, but it's awesome. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
those aren't raw. Those aren't raw rice. They've been malted.
Mhm.
But again, I can't emphasize enough, the diastatic power there is very small compared to barley.
Yeah.
So those rests need to go. And we use
it works.
enzymes
It
to help
works
that
yeah.
process out.
Well, that's awesome. What else do you guys have to share with anybody?
Man, hope this crap is over soon so you guys can come in here to the tap room and have a drink with us.
But definitely get those 4-packs online.
Yeah, keep
them
it.
up.
Yeah,
keep
we
it going.
appreciate,
Yeah,
we
love it.
appreciate as every brewery out there that's in
Yeah.
Maryland, we're all in this together. It sounds like a cliche, it is, but it's truthful. And support us. Jim, you started the whole episode off by saying, when you go out there and you're going to your local packy and store, just buy local. It's
Absolutely.
better quality, it's fresher, and you're helping keep Maryland brewing alive, especially during this crappy ass time.
I can't say much to follow that. Go back, look through the comments, and each one of these beers, I put a link directly to purchase those beers from BC Brewery. Are people able to get these delivered? Do they have to pick them up from you? What's the option there?
So if you go on bcbrewerymd.com, you will see that we are open for pickup from Tuesday to Saturday, 3:30 to 5:30. You have to place your order online. When you place your order online, you'll be able to choose when you're going to pick it up. That lets us know when we need to have it ready. The incredible Sarah Mack or Rich Mack will come out to your car wearing a mask, gloves. It's completely sanitary. All you have to do is open your trunk and we'll just put that stuff in there, and then you're on your way. There is zero contact, zero touch. It is safe. You are safe when you get from us. And the same thing with food. It's all on bcbrewerymd.com. And just be sure we're constantly canning stuff and updating the website. And if there were a change of hours, just be sure to follow us on social media, and we'll mention like, well, today we're going to be open until 7:30, or today we're going to be open until 2:30. I mean, it'll be mentioned online, but just be sure to follow us. And we're constantly doing new things. We have a lot of great things in store, Jim and I. We have some really great beers that we want people to taste. And I think we've gotten over that hump of saying like, well, people will be able to come in the tap room in a couple days. We realize that's not true. So then we're trying to put all of it in cans so you can still taste all the great beers we've made. So
Well, that's awesome.
For all that.
That's really, really great. I appreciate you guys both taking the time this afternoon to join us. For everybody who's watching, thank you for taking the time on a Friday to join us. Please go out, get some great Maryland beer this weekend, and celebrate what we've all got going on. Those of us that are safe and healthy out here, let's stay that way. Visit marylandbeer.org for any updates that you might need from the industry.
There's Joe.
So there's Joe.
Say bye to Joe. Thanks for
The
joining us,
magic man
Joe.
himself, yeah.
And show some love to your local brewery.
Absolutely.
That's all I can
If
ask.
it's not us, make sure you show it to your favorite brewer, and just make sure you support everybody out there that's making Maryland craft beer.
Yeah.
That's it. Sorry for the cameo of my shoe. I just got a German Shepherd puppy and she's trying to chew a little bit.
Never apologize for a puppy. Never apologize for a puppy.
All right, everybody have a safe weekend. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys. Appreciate it.